Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Now, let's dive into the story. The door was supposed to be empty. That was the whole point of paying $3 for an abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere. There would be nothing inside. No people. No obligations. No eyes that expected things from a man who had stopped being able to deliver. But when Declan Marsh pushed open the warped pine door of Cabin 14 on the old Whitfield homestead, Bitterroot Valley, Montana Territory, 1886, the first thing he saw was a boot, a woman's boot. Laced, worn, attached to a leg that disappeared behind the overturned table in the corner, and the boot was moving. Somebody was alive in his $3 purchase, and she was hiding. Declan stepped back. His hand went to the revolver on his hip. Habit, not intention. He was 33, rangy and weather-beaten, with dark hair going silver at the temples too early, brown eyes that had forgotten how to look without calculating threat, and stubble that meant he'd stopped performing hygiene for anyone's benefit. He wore a wool coat, patched at both elbows, a sweat-stained hat, canvas trousers, and boots held together by stubbornness. In his saddlebag, beside a change of socks and a tin cup, was something he hadn't been able to leave behind. A U.S. Deputy Marshal's badge, tarnished, face down, wrapped in cloth like a body he'd buried but couldn't stop carrying. $3 paid to the land office. Everything he owned fit on one horse named Grudge. "I know you're there," he said to the boot. His voice was flat, tired, the voice of a man running on fumes. The boot didn't move, but behind the table he heard breathing, quick, controlled, the breathing of someone deliberately not making a sound. He took one step inside. Dust motes floated in the gray light from the cracked window. The cabin smelled like old wood, cold ash, and something recent. Dried herbs, the faintest trace of wood smoke. Someone had been living here, not passing through. Living. "I'm not going to hurt you," Declan said. He took his hand off the revolver and placed both hands on the doorframe, visible, open. "I just bought this cabin from the county. $3. I have a receipt." Silence. Then a voice, low, steady, with the particular calm of someone who has been frightened so many times that fear has become a dialect. "I know," the voice said. "I heard them sell it." Declan blinked. "You heard them?" "The auction, 3 weeks ago. I was in the crawl space under the floor." She paused. "You were the only bidder." He looked down at the floorboards. She'd been under his feet during the auction. 3 weeks ago. And she'd stayed. "Why didn't you say something?" he asked. The boot moved, the leg straightened, and behind the table, a woman sat up. Slowly, like a deer deciding whether the clearing was safe. She was maybe 28, with sun-dark skin. Black, hair pulled back with a strip of leather, high cheekbones, and eyes the color of creek water. Green-brown, shifting, clear. She wore a man's flannel shirt 3 sizes too large, a wool skirt patched at the knee, and one boot. The other foot was bare. The boot had a hole she'd been trying to patch. She was thin. Not starving thin, but surviving thin. She looked at Declan with something he couldn't read. Not fear. Something older. Patient. "Because I've been waiting," she said. "For what?" "For you," she said. And the cabin, which was supposed to be empty, suddenly felt like the most crowded room Declan had ever stood in. Her name was Thessaly Rowan. She said it the way people say names that have cost them something. Carefully, watching his face for a reaction. It meant nothing to Declan. He'd never heard it. "Thessaly," he repeated. "Like the place in Greece." She looked surprised. "You know Greece?" "I read," he said. It cracked the tension enough for her to lower the piece of broken chair leg she'd been holding behind the table. She'd been ready to fight. With furniture. Declan filed this. A woman who survives alone for 7 months doesn't panic. She arms herself with whatever's closest and waits. Thessaly had been in the cabin for 7 months. She told Declan this while he built a fire in the hearth with wood she'd already split and stacked, evidence of a woman who'd been doing more than hiding. She'd been a seamstress in Butte, working for a tailor named Ferris, who paid her half what he paid his male workers. Ferris was a careful man, the kind who brought tea to his workers every morning and called them "my girls," and remembered their birthdays. The tea kept them at their stations longer. The birthdays were tracked to calculate their productive years, and "my girls" was ownership dressed in warmth. When the mine economy collapsed, Ferris closed the shop. Thessaly had no family, no savings, no standing. She walked south. Found the cabin. Survived. 7 months alone. She'd patched the roof with pine bark, set rabbit snares learned from watching a trapper who camped nearby and never knew she was watching. Gathered herbs, yarrow, sage, juniper berries, dried them on the windowsill, which explained the smell. She'd kept herself alive through a Montana winter with no money and no one who knew she existed. The cabin was condemned because the Whitfield family had abandoned it. Nobody checked. A woman living in a condemned cabin is, to the territory, the same as a cabin with nobody in it. Invisible. "You said you were waiting for me," Declan said. They were on opposite sides of the fire, the geometry of strangers negotiating the distance between suspicion and trust. "I didn't mean you specifically," Thessaly said. "I meant whoever bought the cabin. I knew the county would sell it eventually. I was hoping it would be someone who—" She stopped. "Who what?" "Who looked like they'd lost something, too." Declan studied her. "What makes you think I've lost something?" She pointed at his saddlebags. "Everything you own is in 2 bags. You rode 4 days to buy a condemned cabin for $3. You put your hands on the doorframe to show me you weren't a threat before I even asked." She paused. "That's a man who's lost something. Because only a man who's been empty knows how to make himself small enough to not scare someone." The observation landed on Declan like a stone dropped into still water. Accurate, undeniable, creating ripples in every direction. He looked at this woman who had survived 7 months alone in his $3 cabin and had read his entire biography from 2 saddlebags and a gesture. "You can stay," he said. He didn't know why he said it. He'd come here to be alone. But the words came out the way water comes out of a cracked dam, not because he wanted them to, but because the pressure was greater than his ability to hold them back. "I know," Thessaly said. Not with arrogance. With the quiet certainty of someone who had been waiting for exactly this sentence. "I know," she said again, and the fire agreed. He told her on the 4th night. Not because she asked. Thessaly had the rare intelligence of a woman who understood that men tell their truths on their own timelines, and pushing makes them lie faster. He told her because she was mending his coat. She'd found a needle in her canvas bag and was stitching the patch on his right elbow with stitches so small, and even they looked machine-made. He watched her hands, quick, precise, and something about the domesticity of it, the normalcy, broke him open the way a pickaxe breaks rock. One tap in the right place, and the whole wall comes down. Declan Marsh had been a U.S. Deputy Marshal based in Helena, 6 years riding the territory. Warrants, fugitive recoveries, prisoner transport. He was good at it. Too good. The thing about being good at catching people is you start seeing the world as a ledger of debts. Everyone owes something. Everyone is running. And your job is to close the accounts. It makes you efficient. It also makes you a person who calculates the threat level of a sleeping child. He'd started drinking in year 4, stopped sleeping in year 5. By year 6, his hands shook so badly he couldn't sign his own arrest warrants. The thing that broke him was a homesteader's wife. Clara Sund, Swedish, 24, with a baby and a husband who owed back taxes on land the railroad wanted. The warrant said, "Seize the property." Declan served it. Clara stood in the doorway with the baby on her hip. "Where do we go?" He had no answer. The law said, "Take the land." The law didn't say, "Give them somewhere else." He took the land. Clara and the baby were on the street by noon. 3 days later, the baby died of exposure in a camp outside Helena. Another marshal mentioned it casually. That Sund baby died. Cold got it. 6 words. A child's life compressed into a weather report. Declan, quit the next day. Badge, revolver, star coat. Turned in. Except the badge. He'd tried to leave it on the desk and his hand wouldn't release it. So he wrapped it in cloth and buried it in his saddlebag, face down. The way you bury something you can't look at but can't abandon. He bought Grudge, a bad-tempered gelding who bit strangers and tolerated Declan because misery recognizes its own. Rode south. A condemned cabin for $3 sounded like silence. "I took a baby's home," he said to Thessaly, "and the baby died." His voice flat, not seeking absolution. Weather. Thessaly's needle stopped. "Did you know the baby would die?" "No." "Would you have served the warrant if you had?" "I don't know." "That's the right answer," she said. "A man who says no is lying. A man who says yes is a monster. A man who says, 'I don't know,' is the only one worth talking to." She finished the stitch, bit the thread, handed him back his coat. "You didn't kill that baby, Declan. The cold did. And the law did. And the railroad did. You were the hand, not the brain." She paused, "But the hand remembers, and that's why you're here." He put on the coat. The patch was perfect. Small, even stitches holding together a tear that had been getting worse because he hadn't cared enough to fix it. Someone had cared. Someone with quick hands and the patience to mend a stranger's elbow while he confessed the worst thing he'd ever done. The weight on his chest shifted, not lifted, shifted, like a load redistributed from one shoulder to 2, because now someone else knew, and knowing is the first stitch in the mending of a man who has torn himself apart. She told him hers on the 12th day. They had settled into a rhythm, the unconscious choreography of 2 people sharing a small space who are trying very hard not to touch each other. Declan slept on a bedroll by the hearth. Thessaly slept on the cot. He hunted rabbit and deer. She cooked and gathered herbs and continued mending. Things. His coat, the door, a broken shutter, the chair leg she'd previously used as a weapon. She mended the way some people breathe, automatically, as if the act of repairing was the only thing keeping her intact. "I stole something," she said. "Rabbit stew by the fire, the kind that tastes better than it should because hunger is the best seasoning and company is the second best." From Ferris, the tailor. Declan looked at her. She'd been carrying this for 7 months, and the sentence came out the way a stone drops from a hand that's held it too long, with a relief almost louder than the confession. "I stole his ledger." Then her hands began to tremble. Not violently. A fine vibration, the kind that starts in the bones and works outward. She pressed them flat against her thighs to stop it. But Declan saw. 7 months of holding a secret alone in a crawl space, and the releasing of it was shaking her body the way an earthquake shakes a building that has been standing too still for too long. She exhaled, one long, uneven breath, and the sound of it was 7 months of silence leaving her lungs. The ledger, she explained, was Ferris's private accounts, the real one. It documented everything: shorted wages, stolen fabric resold, bribes to the mine company for uniform contracts, and the part that made Thessaly run. The names of 3 women who had complained and been reported as vagrants and sent to a correction facility. 3 seamstresses. Gone. Because they'd asked to be paid. Thessaly had seen her own name on a list headed next. She'd taken the ledger and run. "Where is it?" Declan asked. His voice had changed, sharper. The deputy marshal waking up underneath the drinking and the guilt. Thessaly stood, walked to the corner, knelt, and pried up 2 floorboards. In the crawl space, the same space where she'd hidden during the auction, was a leather-bound book wrapped in oilcloth. She lifted it out and placed it on the table. The ledger. 7 months under a condemned cabin. Evidence that could end Ferris, free 3 women, and prove Thessaly was not a thief. She was a witness. Declan read for an hour by firelight. The marshal woke page by page. The man who had quit because the law was a weapon now held evidence that the law was also a shield. "This is enough to put Ferris away," he said, "and free those women." Thessaly nodded. "That's why I kept it." "Why didn't you take it to a marshal?" "Because the last marshal I trusted served a warrant on a woman with a baby." She said it without cruelty. Just fact. And Declan felt it land, not as a blow, but as a mirror. She hadn't trusted marshals because marshals took things from women. He was a marshal. He'd taken things from women. And now, a woman who didn't trust his kind had placed the most dangerous document in Montana in front of him and was waiting to see what kind of man the $3 cabin had made him. They arrived on the 14th day. 2 men on horseback, riding south from Butte, asking questions at every homestead. Declan saw them from the ridge, 2 figures moving with the purposeful pace of men looking for something specific. He knew the look. He'd ridden like that for 6 years. They were hunting, and a condemned cabin with chimney smoke was the loudest possible signal. He came back at a run. 2 riders, Butte direction, sundown. Thessaly's face changed, not with fear, with recognition. "Ferris's men. He's been looking since I took it." "How do you know?" "Because I'm still alive. If he wanted me dead, he'd have hired someone faster. He wants the ledger back." Declan looked at the crawl space. The door. His revolver on the peg. The man who had quit the law was calculating, not threat levels this time, but protection strategies. The algebra of keeping someone safe instead of taking something away. The opposite of every equation he'd solved for 6 years. "We could run," Thessaly said. "I've been running 7 months. I'm good at it." Running means the ledger stays hidden. The women stay locked up. Ferris stays free. And we stay alive. Declan looked at her. "There's a U.S. Marshal's office in Missoula. 2 days' ride. If we get the ledger there, it's federal evidence. Ferris goes down. The women go free. You go free." Thessaly studied him. "You said we." Declan paused. He had. The word had come out without permission. The way "you can stay" had come out 12 days ago. "I'm not a marshal anymore," he said. "But I know how evidence works, and I know the road to Missoula." He picked up the revolver. The weight was familiar and uncomfortable. like a coat that fits, but that you associate with the worst period of your life. We leave it dark, south through the canyon. They'll expect north toward the road. We go south, loop west, into Missoula from the back. Thessaly looked at the cabin, the hearth, the cot, the mended shutter, the floorboards she'd pried up and replaced and pried up again. The only home she'd had since Butte. "I just found this place," she said quietly. "I know," Declan said, "but the place isn't the cabin. The place is wherever the ledger gets to someone who'll use it right." They packed in silence. The ledger went into Declan's saddlebag beside the cloth-wrapped badge, the most dangerous document in Montana, now sharing space with the most painful symbol of his past. Thessaly's canvas bag held herbs, needle, thread, and a broken piece of mirror. 2 people, 2 bags, 1 horse, 1 revolver, 1 ledger. The sun went down behind the Bitterroot Mountains, painting the valley the color of a wound beginning to heal. And 2 hours after they rode south into the dark, the men from Butte arrived at Cabin 14. They found the door ajar, the fire cold, the crawl space open, floorboards pried up like a wound that had been drained. One of them, a heavy man with a scar on his neck, kicked the loose boards and cursed. "She's gone," he said. "Not gone," the other replied, crouching at the hearth, pressing his hand against the stones. "Still warm. Hours." They mounted and rode south, but the canyon had many forks, and the dark had no favorites. They rode through the night, Declan on Grudge, Thessaly behind him, her arms around his waist because the trail was steep and narrow, and Grudge was not a smooth ride. It was the first time they'd touched. Not a hand through a fence, not a gesture, a full body hold, her chest against his back, her arms around him, her face pressed against his shoulder blade because the wind cut through the canyon like a blade made of ice. The granite walls rose 40 feet on either side, the trail barely wide enough for 1 horse, loose shale sliding under Grudge's hooves. The cold was the kind that doesn't bite. It swallows. Thessaly's arms tightened around him every time the trail narrowed, and the dark below the edge became absolute. Declan felt her breathing against his spine and thought, this is what it feels like to carry something worth carrying. The canyon trail was his advantage. He'd ridden it during his marshal years, a supply route bypassing the main road. Narrow, rocky, impossible without experience. Ferris's men would take the main road, faster but predictable. The canyon was slower but invisible. Behind them, somewhere in the dark, the men from Butte were guessing. And guessing takes time. Time was the only currency they had. Grudge picked his way through the dark with the sour competence of a horse who had stopped caring about comfort and focused entirely on not dying. The stars above the narrow canyon walls were a thin, bright river overhead. At midnight, they stopped by a creek to water Grudge. Thessaly dismounted, and her legs buckled. 8 hours of riding on muscles that 7 months of cabin living hadn't prepared. Declan caught her elbow. She steadied. They stood by the creek in the dark, water catching starlight. "Why are you doing this?" She asked. He let go of her elbow. "Because 3 women are in a facility for asking to be paid. That's the reason. That's not the why." The creek ran. An owl called. "Because I took a house from a woman with a baby," he said. "And the baby died, and I can't give that back. But I can give this. I can carry a ledger to Missoula and make sure 3 women get their names back. It's not the same debt, but it's the same currency." Thessaly looked at him in the dark. "You're not a bad man, Declan. I'm not a good one either. I know. You're something harder than both. You're a man who's trying." She reached for his hand, found it, held it. His hand was rough and large and shaking slightly. Not from cold, but from the specific tremor of a man who hasn't been touched with intention in a very long time. She held it anyway, because trembling is not weakness. Trembling is the body saying, "I'm still here. I'm still feeling. I haven't turned to stone yet." They rode until dawn. The canyon opened into a valley, and the valley opened into the road, and the road was empty, and the sun came up behind them and painted their shadows long and thin on the dirt. Two shapes on one horse, leaning forward, riding toward something instead of away. Behind them, the Bitterroot cabin sat empty, the crawlspace open, the fire cold. But the cabin had done its work. It had held a woman for 7 months and a man for 12 days and given them both the thing they'd come looking for without knowing it. Someone who understood that broken things are not useless things. Broken things are things that need mending. And mending is the most human act there is. They reached Missoula at noon. The U.S. Marshal's office was a stone building on Front Street with a flag snapping in the wind and a door Declan had walked through 100 times and sworn he'd never walk through again. He stood outside for a full minute. The badge in his saddlebag felt heavier than the ledger. "You don't have to go in," Thessaly said. "You can give me the ledger. I'll take it myself. You don't trust Marshals. I trust you, and you're taking me inside. That's different." He walked in. Marshal Aldrich Wynne was at his desk, gray-haired, fair, the kind of lawman who read evidence before reading emotions. Wynne looked up. "Marsh, heard you quit." "I did. This isn't about me." He placed the ledger on Wynne's desk. A tailor in Butte named Ferris, wage theft, fraud, bribery. 3 women in a correction facility in Helena who were reported as vagrants for asking to be paid. The witness is here. She's been protecting this evidence for 7 months in a condemned cabin while Ferris sent men to find her. Then Declan reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the cloth-wrapped badge. He set it on Wynne's desk beside the ledger. 2 objects, side by side. The badge he'd carried because his hand couldn't release it, and the ledger a woman had carried because her conscience couldn't release it. Both surrendered at the same desk. Both finished. Wynne opened the ledger. His face didn't change, but his hands tightened on the pages. "Where's the witness?" Thessaly walked forward. She stood before the desk in her oversized flannel shirt, patched wool skirt, 1 good boot, and 1 with a hole. She placed her hands flat on the desk, visible, open, the way Declan had placed his on the doorframe 14 days ago. "My name is Thessaly Roan," she said. "I was a seamstress in Butte. I'm not a thief. I'm not a vagrant. And I have a story that needs to be in a report instead of a crawl space." Wynne took her statement for 2 hours. Every name, every date, every shorted wage, every bribe, every woman removed. Thessaly spoke with the precision of someone who had spent 7 months rehearsing to the walls, the fire, the mice under the floorboards. She'd been testifying in her head since Butte. Now she testified out loud. And the words, trapped in crawl spaces and condemned cabins, finally reached air and paper, and the hands of a man with a badge who would use them as they were meant. Not as a weapon against a woman, but as a weapon for her. Ferris was arrested 11 days later. The 3 women were released within the month. One wrote to Thessaly, "I forgot my own name in that place. Your ledger gave it back." Thessaly read the letter 7 times, folded it into her canvas bag beside needle, thread, and broken mirror. Proof, not of Ferris's crimes, of her own courage. They went back, not to Helena, not to Butte, to the Bitterroot. Cabin 14, $3, condemned. The fire was cold, but the hearth was intact. The crawl space was still open. Thessaly knelt and replaced the floorboards, carefully, the way she did everything. "No more hiding," she said to the floor. Then she looked at Declan. "Are you staying?" The same question, reframed. 2 weeks ago, he'd told her she could stay in his cabin. Now she was asking if he'd stay in hers. Because the cabin had always been hers. 7 months of survival had made it hers in every way that mattered. $3 and a receipt were just the territory catching up to what the cabin already knew. "I'm staying," Declan said. Thessaly almost smiled. "I know," she said. "I've been waiting." The same words from the first night, meaning deeper. The first time she'd been waiting for anyone who looked lost. This time she was waiting for him. Specifically, the man who'd walked in with 2 saddlebags and a tremor in his hands and stayed because a woman was mending his coat with stitches too small and too even to come from anyone who didn't believe that broken things deserve repair. The fire was relit. The cabin warmed. And 2 people who had come to the Bitterroot to disappear discovered that the opposite had happened. They had been found, not by each other exactly, by the versions of themselves that only exist when someone is watching who knows what to look for. Thessaly mended. Declan built. The cabin held. And $3 turned out to be the cheapest and most expensive purchase in Montana territory, because it bought a condemned building and delivered a home. And the receipt, which Declan kept in his coat pocket beside the patch Thessaly had stitched, became the only document he'd ever carried that made him feel clean. The badge was on Wynn's desk in Missoula. The ledger was in federal evidence. The coat was mended. And the crawl space was sealed. And everything that had been hidden was finally, permanently, in the light. If this story stayed with you, if the crawl space or the stitches or the words "I've been waiting" are sitting in your chest, leave a like and subscribe to Wild West Talehouse. The frontier has more stories, and the best ones are about the people who found each other in the places the world forgot to look.